Hello, in this tutorial I'm going to show you guys how to make a mask as shown in the video. This is a 4-layer mask and you use elastic to hold it behind your ears. I am not a medical professional, so please take advice from a local doctor as to the layer of protection that you should be wearing, but I'm just going to break this down into really simple steps so that you're able to do this at home rather quickly. So the first piece you need is a tightly woven fabric that's 15 by 9 inches, another tightly woven fabric that is 7.5 by 9. I showed two here, you really just need one. Some wire for the nose. I like my length to be around 5 inches, and I use this rather cheap wire gauge I found at the Dollar Tree. And you need 2 pieces of 9-inch elastics that will be used to hold the mask on. So the first thing you want to do is take the 15 by 9 piece and fold it in half and just try to get it aligned as nicely as possible. Then you want to sew about 1.5 inches using about a 1-inch seam allowance into the mask. So you'll sew 1.5 inches on one side. Make sure to back stitch to hold the stitches in place. So you do that on one side of the mask and then you move it to the other side of the mask. So again, just sewing in 1.5 inches on either side. Now take your mask and turn it inside out, and what you've just created is your pocket. And so take your time to fix your mask as neatly as possible. The next step we're going to do is add the wire in. There's not a whole lot of finishing to this mask. You could add some extra finishing if you want. So what you're going to do is take your wire and fold it right into the crease, to one side of the crease of the pocket that we just created. And so just take your time, try to even out your fabric really nicely, and make sure that that wire is just set nicely in there. Try to center it as best as possible and straighten out that wire as nicely as possible. So the next thing we're going to do is just sew that into place right where I showed, right along the edge of the wire. I like to put my presser foot right on top of the wire, and so that needle is really snugly sewing that in place. I just back stitch a little at the beginning, and then I just slowly go over that wire just to hold it in place. This really isn't a top stitch, it's really just to hold that wire in place so that it doesn't move. After you stitch in the wire, turn it inside out, and from the inside you can see how that wire is right there in that crease. It's okay if it sticks out a little bit. Now we're going to fold the flaps of our pocket in half, and in this step we're going to stitch them closed. Take one part of your elastic and we're going to line it up with the edge about 1 inch down from the top of the mask, or where that pocket has been created, and just try to line it up as best you can. I like to use about a 5/8 seam allowance here, and I stitch over my elastic several times just to hold it into place. So now I'm just going to straighten out my other side of the elastic, making sure nothing is twisted. And again, I'm going to do the same thing and line it up with the opposite bottom edge of the mask And this is going to be one elastic that's going to go around the ear. And notice how I'm not using any pins or clips. This is made to be a really fast mask design. And again, I use that 5/8 seam allowance. Make sure I backstitch all the way down. So now I'm just going to repeat with the other side. Again, I take that elastic, align it about 1 inch from that pocket that we've created. Again, I'm going to take this opportunity to sew those edges down, and I align it as nicely as I can. I'm going to take my elastic, line it up with that edge, and then again I'm going to use a 5/8 seam allowance just to sew that into place as nicely as I can. Again, I like to sew over a few times just to make sure that that elastic stays on nicely. I'm going to pull the opposite end of the elastic through, making sure that nothing is twisted. And again, I'm just lining it up at the bottom, relatively near the same place as the bottom of the other elastic that I just hemmed in place. And I'm going to finish up with my 5/8 seam allowance and sew all the way down my mask and make sure that I catch that second piece of elastic. So now I'm going to turn my mask right side out, and it's starting to look near finished. I'm going to take my time here and poke out all of the corners. I'm going to use a pin. You can use a chopstick or whatever pointed object you find. I would not recommend using scissors. You don't want to cut through your nice project. And just take your time and try to make sure all those corners are pushed out nicely. They reduce bulk and your project will also look a lot nicer. After you get your mask nicely shaped and all the corners poked out, we can now start focusing on the pin tucks that we're going to create on the front of the mask. Make sure you know where your wire is at. Mine is located here, and you want your pin tucks to go down in the direction from your wire. And so I just try to space them about 1 inch each. And then in this part, I definitely want to clip these in place because it's a lot of fabric. So I like 3 pin tucks. 4 pin tucks might give your mask a more contoured shape, but I found that 3 is relatively easy to make with this size mask. The more pin tucks you make, like I said, the mask will fit more nicely to your face. Just take your time and do at least 3 pin tucks here, and just make sure that your fabric is relatively straight when you put those pins into place. So make sure that your pin tucks are nicely lined up. If you take your time, you really don't need to measure, and you can see your lines and make sure that they're nice and straight. As soon as you're satisfied, you're just going to sew along each of the edges. I like to use about a little less than 5/8 of an inch on either side. Depending on how much fabric your machine can handle, you may want a larger seam allowance, but a little less than 5/8 has worked really nicely for me. Just take your time and sew those pin tucks into place. So this concludes the mask making portion. The next step I'm going to show you guys is how to make your filler fabric. Right now this is a 2-layer mask, but if you want a 4-layer mask, you need to also put something inside your mask to make up for those additional layers. So use that 7.5 by 9 inch piece, and you can have as many layers as you want. Using one piece, you can create 2 additional layers. So if you just used one of those pieces, you would have a total of 4 layers in your mask, which, depending on the fabric, can be pretty thick, and it might be enough for your needs. So take the piece of fabric and fold it in half with the right side touching, and you're going to use about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You could use a little bit more. And just sew along both edges. So here's the first edge. Make sure to backstitch to hold that into place. And just repeat on the opposite side. When this extra inner layers are finished, they're actually a little bit bigger than the mask, but I like to make sure that the entire inside of the mask is covered, so I'd rather have too much fabric than not. And then along the long edge, I'm going to sew on both sides, leaving a hole in the middle. I don't like leaving my hole near the corners because then your piece is not going to look as nice. So I'm just going to sew a little bit, backstitch, give myself about 2 to 3 inches to make sure that I can turn this piece of fabric inside out, and then backstitch, and then I'm just going to take that and turn my inner pieces of fabric inside out. So again, I just turn this piece and I'm going to poke out all the corners and make sure that it's as square as possible, just so that it lays nice and flat on the inside of the mask. And I'm just going to take my time with each of the corners. I'm going to take that hole and just fold those inside edges over, and then I'm going to top stitch all the way around using about a 1/8 seam allowance, just to make sure that I catch that hole and make sure that it's closed nicely. When I get to the corner, I'm just going to leave my needle down and lift my presser foot and turn that fabric so that I can start on the next edge, and I'm going to do that all the way around until I get back to that original stitching. So yay, we're done. This really is all the sewing that's left. A few threads may be needed to be cleaned up here and there, but outside of that, you can stuff in your fabric. And just try to shape it as nicely as possible, making sure that that inner fabric just sits really nicely in there. And this is what the final piece should look like. It really stretches nicely over your face. You have your inner fabric there. Your inner fabric is a little larger than your mask, but I like to make sure that it completely covers it there and it just feels comfortable to me. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and please subscribe for more videos. See you guys later.